Some killer, I guess very different conditions to that in Paris today. But is the mood the same, a fairly somber mood?
Well, indeed, Peter, here in Johannesburg, it looks at this point in time like a very somber mood. We've seen the arrival of the Executive Mayor of Johannesburg, Councillor Herman Mashabais, who will be leading the commemorations here today. But we are now joined by the SA Legion National President, Godfrey, who will further expand on today's commemoration, what it means for South Africa. Godfrey, what does this commemoration mean for South Africans today, particularly looking at the Cape Corps, those South Africans who died in the SSS Mendi, which was celebrated its 100th centenary last year. Our colleague Chula Caesar was out in Britain to celebrate and commemorate that and cover it for ENCA. What does this day mean for South Africans and for the South African Army?
Okay, the first one is that this is the centenary of the end of the First World War. But that's not the only thing that is important to us. Because the Cenotaph, a lot of people don't understand. Most of our soldiers that died were buried other places in the world. So the loved ones haven't got a gravestone to go to actually pay their respects. So that's what the Cenotaph is all about, is that the families and family members can actually come together and pay their respects to the gravesite of all of the guys that are actually buried overseas. So that includes the guys of the Cape Corps and especially the Battle of the Square Hill, because that's where the guys fought a very difficult battle, and they held that ground as well. Then you've also got SS Mendi. Those guys were going to help the soldiers with the Labour Corps, etc. And they'd never even been in a boat, never mind been in the sea. And then suddenly they get the Darrow goes into it and crashes it. And these guys then went into icy water 5 o'clock in the morning and sank. And a lot of them didn't know how to swim as well. So this is really for all wars. So we rededicated the Cenotaph, not only for the First World War, Second World War, Korea, the liberation struggle, including the border war. So it's for everybody, including over 100 soldiers we've now lost so far from the SANDF in training and also in peacekeeping as well. So this is for all of them.
Do South Africans know the history of South Africans, particularly in World War I? Do we know our history? Is that history being properly documented? Is it being disseminated and being taught to South Africans, particularly the newer generation, the so-called born-frees post-1990, and those who are from the 1976 generation? Do we know this history, or are we just purely focused on the liberation struggle history?
I think a lot of it is a liberation struggle because that is what we've lived through. So people are living through that, their families have been through it. A lot has been done as far as the Mendi is concerned. So there was a book that was actually written, Black Valor, that we actually pushed out from Natal University. The Legion was very involved in that as well. So to me it's very important that we actually get that across. Battle of Square Hill hasn't been done enough. It was the centenary this year and we weren't able to actually send troops to Palestine and Israel. That's where the battle was. So no, we haven't done enough. We need to do more.
When we look at the family members and some of those who may have had a history or have family links to those who were part of World War I, World War II, who will be commemorating this day today, how do they particularly feel about World War I and all the events that have transpired since those events passed by and those agreements were signed to end World War I, World War II, to end the liberation struggle? How do they particularly feel and how is their involvement in these events?
I think that's, I've just stepped down as the national president of the Legion. That is what the Legion's all about, is to actually get it out there, to find the family members. So we have what we call Veterans Day on the first Sunday of November, where we go to the grave sites and we actually clean up the grave sites of the various people that were killed or have died since then. We must only think about the people that fell, the people that served this country who then passed on afterwards. And we need to look after the families because they had to suffer with some of these people that came back injured as well. So, no, not enough has been done, and that's where we're working with the Department of Military Veterans to try and get that across to everybody as well.
I'm going to hijack you on a political aspect here. When you look at the current trade wars that are happening in the world right now, the upsurgence of some what may call right-wing leaders such as your Donald Trump in the United States of America. You've heard the president of South Korea having some sort of a tip with the United States president over nuclear war weapons. Do you think modern day leaders are conscious of the decisions that they take and how it may plunge the world into some sort of World War III, whether it's between a trade war or a nuclear war? Do they think they are politically conscious enough to know the history of wars that have taken place and the decisions that they are making today?
You know, it's the politicians that cause the wars, not the soldiers. The soldiers have got to go and fight them. I wish we could get the politicians, whenever they want to have a war, is that they've got to put money into a special account that actually helps to repair everything that has actually taken place. Because the destruction that actually takes place, you look at all the stuff on the TV that you see of those buildings that are hit to pieces, towns are hit to pieces. We've got one lady here, Annika, she was actually 5 years old at The Hague in the Second World War. They got the wrong coordinates on the aeroplane and they bombed the city. She was 5 years old, her brother and her mother got out of that. She's actually here today and she'll be laying a wreath. That is the kind of tragedies that we don't think about. As soldiers, we don't want wars at all. If we could get rid of wars, we would do that tomorrow. But if you are now part of a country and you're serving the country of the day, the government of the day, then you have to.
So in essence, you are saying that presidents and politicians may not have the necessary care to think about the impact world wars and wars have on the ordinary man on the ground and on the people, besides their political grievances with other countries.
I think we've got to learn to talk to each other, and we must get politicians. The last resort should be, but so often it seems to be greed or some vendetta that somebody's got. We need to talk more with each other. 100 years ago we stopped the last war, saying that was the war of all wars, we'd never have another one. And we just carried on. For 100 years we're just having one war after another, and as you say, they're talking about war right now. So I wish that the veterans can actually say enough is enough now.
When you look at the current political climate in the globe, and you look at what's currently happening in Israel and Palestine, and the war that's going on there, particularly in the Gaza Strip, what does that say to you as a former soldier, particularly with those countries that are currently faced with wars in their countries, particularly the battle between Israel and Palestine?
I don't know enough about that one to even pass a judgment on it. Again, I say to you, it's the politicians that are actually speaking about it, and then they put the armies in to actually do it. So we need the politicians to sort it out.
Well, thank you very much. That was Godfrey, who's just stepped down as the president, the national president of the SA Legion, speaking about how politicians have an impact on the wars that are currently and have taken place in the world right now and over the past few years, also reflecting on the trade wars and if that could trigger a World War III, particularly looking at the tension that was there between America and South Korea. You look at the political environments that's currently taking place in the world, where there is a so-called one what may say, I don't want to have a correct word, the ascendance of so-called right-wing leaders into presidencies in the countries such as Brazil, the United States of America. You look at how straightforward talking Donald Trump is, saying it's America first, then the rest of the world. You look at the harsh words it has for countries such as the second biggest economy in the world, such as China. You look at how him and the South Korean president were engaged in some sort of a spat together.
Samkele, thank you. That's where we'll leave it there. Samkele Maseko live there from Johannesburg. We'll take you, bring you some highlights of that wreath-laying ceremony later on.